Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here tonight, and I'm so honored that Valerie invited me to give the Dharma talk. I have been coming to Mountain Cloud on and off for more than 10 years. I used to attend the family Sangha when my two daughters, who are now teenagers, were very young. And coming here was like we would just flop on the cushions with exhaustion and relief that someone else had the children in another room. and anyway, I have really tremendous respect for the teachings of Valerie and Henry, and both of their teachings have been profoundly influential in my own Zen practice, and even with the writing of Brief Flashings in the Phenomenal World. So that's primarily what I'm here to talk about tonight, is what are the brief flashings. But first, I just want to say it's always a good practice to come and do a sit before a Dharma talk, because you really revisit like the physical suffering, that sort of internal dialogue of like, please make this end, and like the hip pain and that sort of like internal pleading, like, and silently looking out of the corner of my eye, like, when is he going to tap the bell? So anyway, always humbling to come to sitting practice. I do have a sitting practice. I have a running practice, obviously, as was mentioned, and but I love talking to people about both running and Zen, and I always know I'm about to give a Dharma talk, because that week I think about what I maybe possibly understand about Zen, and I forget everything. And that's always my clue that, oh yeah, you're about to try to talk about Zen, which is, you know, so inexpressible sometimes. And that was really the challenge of writing Brief Flashings in the Phenomenal World, was I had this very physical and visceral and tangible experience with Zen, and how to capture that in writing, especially because what we know of Zen, it's sort of escapes definition, and then you try to kind of capture it, and it like slides like seaweed from your grasp, and as it should. And that suits me, because as a writer, as I've been a writer all of my adult life, I've always sought the questions rather than the answers, and the questions and the mysteries are far more interesting to me than the answers. So I think I was just a natural fit for Zen, coming to life as I do with that not knowing mind, and that curiosity of a writer, and that translates to my curiosity as an athlete and a runner. And as, it's Graham, right? Grant, I just had like total paranoia. As Grant mentioned, having run Leadville 2 weeks ago, huge respect. Running is at its heart an exercise in uncertainty and not knowing, and then especially running 100 miles through mountains with so many different variables. There's terrain and weather and altitude. Are you at high elevation or low? How much vertical gain do you have? And you can practice, as I think about my running training as practice, you can practice for all those variables and those elements. And that's obviously at the heart of Zen, is that continuous practice and making true effort in each moment. But then when you get to an endeavor like a 100-mile race, you have to let go of everything you think you know and everything you've prepared for, and switch into a receiving mode. And that's really always how I've run, even before I get to the part that I'll talk about, that really this episode, this period of time that the book covers, which begins in 2016. But I had been studying and practicing Zen since around 2010. My father passed away, I had a newborn baby, and just various things brought me to Zen. And it was shortly after he died that I started running very long distances as a way to heal myself, or to try to heal from just this very acute grief and anxiety that I was in. And so early on, I somehow just came to this myself. It wasn't anything that I read or was taught per se, but I would come to a race, and I was racing anything from 30 miles to 62 miles, sort of in that period of time. And as long as I was confident that I'd done the work, like meaning the training, the practice, putting in the hours of the time, that I needed to prepare, I could get to the starting line. And it was like I would shift this button, like flip a switch, literally. I picture it like I'm pointing to on my arm, that I would just switch into receive mode. It's like, I don't know if anyone's ever been in the in avalanche country in the mountains in the winter, and you have avalanche beacons. And when you're just out skiing, you are transmitting. And then when you go into search mode, you're searching. And so I felt like I was just waiting for the signals to come to me in a race. And so that's all a long-winded way of saying that I had a Zen practice. I have a Zen mind, though I probably wouldn't have called it that. But after I suffered this terrible accident, which I'll talk about, I realized that sort of my work as a writer and as an athlete in the world, and even as a parent, which is also a great exercise in uncertainty, that I was really ripe for exploring and deepening my Zen practice. And so I'll begin just telling a little bit about brief flashings in the phenomenal world. And I thought I would just sort of discuss the title for a minute, because I think of sort of how I go about life as looking for the brief flashings in the phenomenal world. And they're like these little moments of wonder that sort of wake us up to the fact that we're alive and make us feel connected to both ourselves and the natural world and to those around us, and part of everything, and also that everything's part of us. And it's a hard thing to grasp sometimes, that these flashings are going on all around us all the time. But we're often too busy, too distracted by our screens, our responsibilities, our schedules, life, to notice. And we ourselves are the flashings, and sitting here together is a flashing. And just as an example, this morning I went out for a run, and in that sort of like that pre-Dharma talk desperation, I was like, what is Zen? And I went up running up the mountain, as I do, to sort of gather my thoughts and let kind of, it's like the running is like when you make a salad and you toss it with salad dressing. The running is the tossing, right? So everything sort of works around in me, and I can see my mind, and I can sort of hear my true heart. And so I was running up the mountain, and I had one earbud in because I'm a mother, I have kids, I'm always like sort of responding to things probably too late often and not timely enough. But I had my earbud in, and I decided to text my friend Natalie Goldberg, who some of you may know, and she's been a friend of mine for 14 years, and we've been hiking up mountains together and talking about writing and Zen together. And I laugh because in the prologue to Brief Flashings in the Phenomenal World, it opens with me going to Upaya to give a Dharma talk that would become, unbeknownst to me, sort of the framework for this book. And before I gave that talk, I sort of had that moment of like, what is it? What's Zen? I need a definition. And I told Natalie that, and she laughed, and she didn't give me a definition. She said, just wear dark clothes. Which is Zen, right? Which is Zen. It's not direct answer to the question. And so this morning, I just thought, for a little time's sake, as I was going up the mountain, I texted Natalie in all caps, what is Zen? And smiley face, so she knew I was kidding. And then I was partly serious, though, because I was like, what do I want to say tonight? And as soon as I'd asked the question in that sort of joking way, I dictated into my phone answering it, and I said, just kidding. I think I know. At least today, right now, running up the mountain, I remember. And I think that we're always moving in and out of this certainty and knowing and not knowing, and thank goodness for that, right? Because if we knew everything and had certainty about everything, life would be pretty dull, right? And so Zen for me has been a journey into embracing the unknown and switching to receive, to see those brief flashings as they come, and kind of finding the wonder everywhere, which for me is mostly outside in the mountains, and often running up the mountain. But I'll just read, I wanted to read a little bit where the title comes from. It's sort of my own, maybe not intentional mangling, but then later I realized that I hadn't quoted exactly from this line that moved me so much from the book Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And that book became a companion for me in the aftermath of this accident that I'm going to tell you about. I read the book once through, and then I started reading again because it seemed to contain, I mean, it was disguised as a manual on meditation, but it really seemed to contain like just the secrets to being alive, and you can apply it to anything, including running. And I was having a difficult time with my running at the time. And so I was reading it as a runner to sort of absorb the teachings and find my way back to running. And this particular time I was reading it was the summer of 2017, and I was up in Colorado with my family, and we were camping beside a river like we usually do. My husband's a very avid fly fisherman. That also features in the book. And we were about to hike up a mountain with our very young daughters, also something we do regularly. And I was reading, I was sitting by the river reading Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind before we sort of got on our way as a family. And I came across these two lines, or two passages, and I'll read them now. Sometimes a flashing will come through the dark sky. After it passes, you forget all about it, and there is nothing left but the dark sky. The sky is never surprised when all of a sudden a thunderbolt breaks through. And when the lightning does flash, a wonderful sight may be seen. When we have emptiness, we are always prepared for watching the flashing. So I read that, and it was like a lot of Suzuki Roshi's writings and Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. If you try to hit it head on with your brain, it resists interpretation or understanding. But if you just let it wash, those words kind of wash through you and over you, they hit, as my teenage daughters would say, they hit different. And so there I was beside the river, and they were having a different effect on me. And it was like a lightning bulb went off. And I'll read a little bit more. Each one of us is a complete flashing into the vast, phenomenal world. When I am sitting, there is no other person, but this does not mean I ignore you. I am completely one with every existence in the phenomenal world. So when I sit, you sit. Everything sits with me. This is our Zazen. And so I knew as soon as I read that book that that idea was what I was working on. I had not started writing my book. I had recently only healed from this accident, and the book was still a long way off, but it just went into me like a bolt, and I realized that's what I'm writing about. That's what this feeling is, and that's what those brief flashings are what have always moved me to be a writer, and is to pay attention to the flashings. And in my first book, Running Home, I write about my relationship with my father, who was a photographer for National Geographic for his whole career. And he really taught me the power of seeing and paying attention. And as a photographer, right, you're always on the lookout for those flashings, those little moments of truth and actuality and of essence. And I think being his daughter, I was trained to see the flashings. He wouldn't have called them those. He was not a Zen Buddhist. He was, I would think he would call himself an atheist. But nonetheless, he saw them all the time, and he caught them on film. And so I realized I was writing a book about the flashings, and the flashings were something that I'd always been paying attention to. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the book itself, which, just to give a summary, is really the story of this terrible wilderness accident that I suffered in July or June of 2016. And my husband and I had been invited to go on a rafting trip on the Middle Fork of the Salmon River. And we are big river people. We've always floated rivers together. We fell in love on rivers. We've raised our young daughters and now our teenagers by doing river trips. So this was not a stretch. We had a lot of experience rowing and being on water. And the Middle Fork, if you have heard of it, is one of the premier wilderness rivers in the country. And it's 100 miles of pristine wilderness through a canyon so remote, it's called the River of No Return. And there's no way in or out, right? It's just by foot or boat, or in emergency, there's a couple of airstrips where bush pilots can put their planes down. And in that 100 miles, there's 100 major rapids. So that's class 3 and class 4 rapids. And so this would be the biggest whitewater we'd ever been on together. And we didn't bring our girls because they were too young, too much consequence. And even though we've been taking our kids out on rivers since they were literally babies, we're pretty conservative in the wilderness. And so we were going, it was also, I should note, to celebrate our 10th anniversary. And so it was a perfect expression of sort of our love and how we had built our family very intentionally in nature. And but things did not go to plan. And on the very first day of the trip, within the first few miles, we encountered a rapid that operated in a different way than rapids we were used to. And what happened was a very flukish accident, and I'm going to read a little bit about that. So this is from Brief Flashings in the Phenomenal World, and this is literally probably in the first 10 minutes of what will be a 6-day river trip. I scan the river ahead for obstacles. There are too many to count, too many to call out, too much we don't know. We don't know that around the next bend is a pyramidal rock jabbing its pointed crown up from the middle of the river. We don't know that the rest of our group, now out of sight, has taken the left channel. We don't know that the current will suck us into the rock like iron shavings onto a magnet, or that Steve, that's my husband, will think he has one more second than he does to take one more oar stroke off to pull us off. It all happens so fast. Maybe I say, do you see that rock, with a sharpness to my voice that Steve might take to imply distrust. Maybe Steve answers yes in a hard, tight way that indicates we are coming upon the rock faster than he thought, or it upon us. Maybe I don't have time to say anything. I sense the tension in the way Steve is rowing, the way we seem to be resisting the river, pulling hard against it. Then we're on it. Instead of bouncing off the rock, as inflatable rafts often do, ours crumples against its face, blue rubber folding in on itself. We are not spinning free back into the rapid. We are sideways against the rock. I'm on the high side looking down at Steve, who yells, "High side," and clambers up beside me, hoping the shift in weight will release our boat from the swirl of current pinning us to the rock. For an instant, we hang there, perpendicular to the river, at an angle so wrong I will do whatever it takes to fight it. I climb higher on the rubber thwart. The angle is changing, but not in our favor. Now it's acute, tightening, the high side of the raft narrowing its gap with the water. Slowly, in what feels like quarter time, we are falling over, falling in. "Oh no," Steve yells. And then there's no worse sound than those two words, because Steve is always solid. He does not accidentally row into rocks. He does not freak out. Steve's shout hangs in the air, the syllables elongated with terrible precision. Then, in a spin of elbows and knees, he's flopping into the water, churning white waves breaking on rocks, and I do the thing I know I shouldn't. I hesitate. I hold on. I feel the strain in my neck, my arms, my thighs as I brace against the hard rubber floor of the raft. I'm not falling. This is not happening. But it is happening. Every fiber of my being is pinched tight, every muscle flexed, resisting gravity, resisting the river. I'm hanging in a moment that seems to stretch on forever. Let go, my brain screams, as my body does the opposite. It's futile, but I'm fighting it. I know I shouldn't, but I am. I've taught myself how to run up mountains, but I don't know how to fall. And so thus begins my real, like, firsthand, quite intimate practice in Zen, which is, the first one is letting go, right? And I was holding on and resisting so tightly, falling into the water. Steve had fallen in, but I was clinging, and finally I do fall in, and as soon as I'm in the water, I know I'm hurt, and badly. My leg is wobbling in the joint, my knee feels, completely outside of my body, and somehow we get to shore. And we gather up our raft, which has been, flung over and various things strewn about, and we get, we sort of regroup with our group, and then we have to make a decision. And if you've spent any time in the wilderness, you know that you don't, when you're on a trip or an expedition with a group, you have to make a group decision. And it's a team, right? The well-being of one of us affects all of us. And so I'm in shock, and we're trying to figure out, do we, we're only 3 miles downstream, but 3 miles in a river canyon, called the River of No Return is no easy feat to get out of. And so we decide that we are going to continue. We do an assessment. My head is fine, everything's fine, and my knee, we think, is maybe dislocated. So we go with that story. And we decide that if we need to, there's egress downstream. There are these dirt airstrips that we can call. And so thus begins kind of this journey into the deepest part of the canyon. And I don't fly out. I stay with the group. And I realize that in order to stay, I will have to have this, like, single-minded focus and concentration to stay in the boat, right? I know that I can't fall out again. And so here too is a chance to practice the Zen that I've been doing at home and on my cushion and on the mountain, which is one rapid at a time, right? We talk in Zen about one breath at a time, this breath and then the next, one moment. For me, it became one rapid at a time. We flipped on mile 3, and it was not even a named rapid. So say we have 97 and a half more, major rapids to go. That becomes this, it's a Zen state of focus, and I have to stay in the boat. And I'm switched on to a different raft, a bigger raft, which becomes sort of, the book is also a marriage story, very much like a love story, and a love story in all the honesty and sort of trouble that a marriage can have over time. And so I'm put on a different boat, and we have 5.5 more days to go. And I'll read another little bit just to give you a sense of this. Slowly, after a shock, the world comes back into focus. Camp that first night was an ash pile left over from a recent forest fire. I'd been expecting the burned areas to look stark and grim, but they were just as striking as the healthy ponderosa pines along both banks. Trees stuck out of the earth, charred and pointy, leaning at precarious angles, like half-torch matchsticks marching up mountainsides. You could see so much farther through the scorched forest. Landscapes otherwise hidden to the human eye, revealed. The burns were beautiful because they were natural. Steve and Rob, he's our friend who invited us on the trip, heaved me up from the raft to a high, flat place, my arms slung around theirs and theirs around me. They set me down in the dust with my notebook while they and everyone else busied themselves setting up tents. I pinched my toes to check for feeling. They'd ballooned up, fat and stubby, like miniature hot dogs, diminutive versions of my humongous swollen knee. Steve went fishing, caught a few. People ate dinner out of plastic bowls and drank cheap canned beer, and someone played the guitar like it was any other night on any other river. Time ran together. It was night, but not dark yet, because it was Idaho at the summer solstice, and I needed to sleep, but I couldn't. My leg was a wad of stiffness. In the tent, I had to lie on my back and not move, with my knee propped up on my dry bag to keep the swelling down. Steve lay beside me. We were fighting, but trying not to be heard through the thin nylon walls. It was our same argument about control. Why hadn't he pulled us off the rock? Why hadn't he been more assertive? Why hadn't I? Why hadn't I fallen out of the boat the right way? Hard, blaming words hissed back and forth, compounded by shock and fatigue. The adrenaline had worn off, and my knee pulsed with a deep, thumping ache. I lay awake for a long time, waiting for something, an apology, remorse, mine and his. But soon Steve was snoring, and I must have fallen asleep eventually, too, because when I opened my eyes, I was alone in the tent, and the light outside was gray and thin, dawn. I dreamed that my leg was fine and had healed in the night. I could walk again. The dream was so vivid it seemed real, but when I tried to roll over, my knee throbbed, and I knew it wasn't true, and I felt like crying. I peered through the tent flap. Steve was in the kitchen, the camp kitchen. All around us, the trees were blackened matchsticks charred into spears. It was pretty, the torched forest that was slowly coming back to life when you looked at it a certain way. And so, we stay on the river, and we finally make it off. And there's a moment, too, that feeling when we get to the end of also not wanting the river trip to end. That canyons, in their way, right, they protect us. They're this shelter, kind of this womb in the earth, that even when this canyon was testing us beyond what we'd ever thought possible and challenged us in ways we never wanted to be challenged, it had sheltered us. And at the confluence, the Middle Fork joins the main salmon, and the main is a much bigger river, and the Middle Fork is coming out of the Sawtooth Mountains, so it's really clear, and that's why it's great for fly fishing. And where the two rivers meet, there's an actual stripe in the river where the color is different. And we got to that stripe, and ahead of us is a sign that's like, "Yonder lies the wilderness." And we were coming out of it, and I was in a boat ahead of Steve, and the whole way down the river, I'd been really concerned. I wanted Steve to be safe. As much as I wanted to stay in the boat, maybe even more, I wanted Steve alone in our raft to be safe. And I'll never forget, we came to the confluence, and I looked behind me and I saw the canyon walls, and they were so steep and impenetrable. We're leaving it. And I had the sense that even, though it had been such a difficult trip and arduous and extremely painful, I couldn't bear weight and I was carried everywhere, that I would miss it. And that I had this sense, and I saw Steve turn around. He set his oars beneath his knees when he wants to rest in a river, and he looked back too, and I saw that he was seeing it. And I suddenly had this feeling that sort of the hardest part was still to come. And I'll just, looking at the time, sort of summarize a little bit in that I got back to Santa Fe, and my surgeon, I thought I'd maybe dislocated it. So I was like, "Can I get an MRI?" And my doctor was like, "Come in for an X-ray." And I was like, "An X-ray?" And so I went in for an X-ray. I must have, I don't remember it. And he called me the next day and he said, "It's broken, and it's badly broken. It's shattered, your tibial plateau, which is just below the knee, and you're gonna need surgery. And you're gonna be on crutches for 14 weeks, and it's a really difficult recovery, and if I were you, I would never run again." And if you've ever been in a doctor's office when someone, in a position of authority with the white coat, says something like that, it's absolutely devastating. And he was not impressed that I'd stayed on the river, right? So knew the time had run out on me, and I needed to get the surgery, and so I really had no choice. And I was in the surgeon's office, sort of just sobbing at the idea that I might not run again. And he was quite dismissive. And I said, but it stopped hurting. Like maybe it's, starting to heal. And I think that's that same sort of like focus that I had on the river, maybe you could call it delusion, that was already healing. And he kind of looked at me and laughed, in not a very nice way. And he's like, I'm going to take you back to zero with your pain, and it's going to hurt like you just broke it. And I only say that because the idea of zero is also this idea in Zen of sort of that nothingness state, that emptiness where you're stripped down to essence. And when you're stripped down to essence, it's terrifying and traumatic and deeply uncomfortable. And I was no joy to be around that summer, I can promise you that. And sort of the strife that my husband and I had experienced on the river, intensified during my healing. And so I was both healing my body and my spirit and my heart. But after the initial trauma passes, after that first 6 or 8 weeks, you realize that there's actually a beautiful thing about zero. And it means that you are a beginner again, and anything is possible. And so that's around the time that my friend Natalie brought me a copy of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And she sort of gave it to me very nonchalantly, giving me no clue that this book, was what it was, and that it was, would profoundly change my life. And she gave it to me with a little caveat. She's like, this is a classic, but you might not understand it. And I knew she didn't mean like my intellect, but she meant that, Zen is sometimes impenetrable. And so I started reading it, and as soon as I started reading it, I understood it, and not with my brain, but in my body. And I understood it because I understood running. And so many of the principles that Suzuki Roshi introduces and explores that in depth in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind are the teachings of running. And there's so much overlap. And again, as I mentioned earlier, you can really read that book and apply it to anything you do, to anything in life. Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind applies. But some of the teachings that I sort of absorbed, I don't want to say used, right? Because we're not supposed to use it to become anything or do anything better. We're just supposed to be it. But some of the lessons were very profound in sort of helping me return to running. And I'm just going to read this really short thing that gets at, let's see. Okay. It gets at this part of the story. This is from the prologue. Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind became my companion through my long recovery. It was disguised as a manual on meditation, but I felt as though I'd stumbled upon a secret instructions of how to live. Each one of us must make his own true way, and when we do that, that way will express the universal way, Suzuki Roshi wrote. It didn't matter if it was skydiving, writing, running, or Zen. When you understand one thing through and through, he wrote, you understand everything. The river accident had upended everything and made me a beginner all over again. It was unclear if my body or my marriage would come through intact or if I would ever run again. If I did, I would never run the same as I once had, just as I would never be the same. Even then, part of me understood that this was a good thing, maybe the very best thing. And so I begin reading the book for teachings that can help me find my way back to Zen. And I'm just going to read briefly. We talked about letting go and not holding so tightly, and I experienced that firsthand on the river. I was literally gripping to the raft so that every muscle was flexed and tight. And Steve, on the other hand, just let go. He just fell in relaxed into the water, and he was unharmed. And I'd learned too that that focus to sort of face the world as it is in the moment rather than as you want it to be. And so that was that experience of taking the river one rapid at a time. I was deeply distressed to be on the river. But I was very torn. I didn't want to leave Steve, but I wanted to go home so much. But I had no choice but to stay on. And actually, that's not true. I had a choice, and I chose to stay on. And once I made that choice, it was facing what was in front of me, which was, this class 4 rapid, the one downstream. You can't, that's sort of the beauty of rivers, and they are Zen teachers in their way too, in that when you're on a river, you can only see the bend you're on. You can't see 5 or 6, bends down the river. And so you have to stay in the moment. You have to stay with the rapid you're on. And thank goodness, because if I had been able to see, if I'd been a drone or a raven or an eagle, there's so many eagles in that canyon, flying downstream and seeing the big rapids and the little waterfalls and the holes and the hydraulics, I might not have been able to stay on. So using that focus of mind. And then a big one for me is, and this is, I think, central to Zen as I understand it, which is to be yourself. Be your original self and make continuous effort with the true spirit of determination. And that's always, when I think about Zen, I just think all I have to do is be who I am. And I'm going to read a little bit from this chapter where, so I've healed, I'm starting to run again, my leg is intact, I'm reading the book over and over, it's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. Every time you finish, you have to start over. And I decide to put my name in for the lottery for a 100-mile race, as Grant mentioned, the Leadville 100. It had always been a dream of mine. I actually always wanted to mountain bike it. There's a mountain bike race too. That's 100 miles. Actually, it's 104 miles. But I was a runner now, and so I thought, well, life works in funny ways, so I'm going to try to run it. And the longest I'd run before that was 62 miles. And so this, I'm just going to read a little bit about kind of being yourself. It's dark in here. Okay. 100 miles is inconceivable. The longest I've run since my accident was 42 miles across the Grand Canyon and back with the flu, which Grant mentioned, which still occasionally struck me as so profoundly idiotic, I wasn't even sure it counted. Thank you. Now when I think about the Leadville 100, sparks of terror shimmer through my brain. I think about the surgeon. If I were you, I'd find a new hobby, he said. I think about my knee calcifying into a giant blob of arthritis. I think about how I probably ought to run less and be home more. But then I decide I can't think about 100 miles, whether I am doing it right or getting it all wrong. I just have to run. My plan for Leadville is the same as always, no plan. Practically speaking, I'll gradually increase the length of my runs by a few miles each week and move as much as possible every day. Between walking my girls to school and running and walking the dog after dinner, I can cover about 15 miles a day. I once heard that the most important metric in training for 100 miles isn't weekly mileage or pace, but time on your feet. I make this my mantra. I will get used to moving all day, running on tired legs, staying in motion. My only training guide isn't a running book, but a chapter in Zen Mind Beginner's Mind called Right Effort. Right effort, Suzuki Roshi explains, is pure practice, untainted by desire for achievement or attainment, gain or fame. It is pursuing an activity with the appropriate amount of energy and intensity, not going overboard or being melodramatic, not making a big show out of it, but devoting yourself to your practice thoughtfully, persistently. When you make some special effort to achieve something, some excessive quality, some extra element is involved, he writes. You should get rid of excessive things. Right effort is sustainable, continuous effort, something you can do for days, months, years, a lifetime. And so that's how I was going to train for Leadville. And as an elite runner, that's not a very conventional approach. Everyone has a watch and metrics and stats and data and a coach, and they're on Strava. And I fortunately had never been that way. Again, I think that was sort of my inner Zen, my hidden Zen coming out. And I just preferred to run for the pleasure and the joy of it, and feeling the mountain. And in a relationship, right? Like Zen is often described as an intimacy with the mountain. And so I was just going to keep doing it my way. But there are many moments of doubt, thinking, well, am I preparing well? And what are other people doing? But I just had to keep coming back to that center of self and knowing, while letting go of needing any kind of specific result. And I think that was the key. And a lot of people ask me, like, how are you a competitive athlete if you're not holding an idea of what you want to happen? Like, isn't Zen passive? And it's the opposite, right? I'm sure, as you know from sitting in this room, like it's more arduous and more rigorous to let go of that gaining idea and to show up just for the practice itself, regardless of what will happen. And so in answer to the question of people, like, how do you balance that? I would just show up every day in my training, whatever it looked like. Maybe it was walking the dog, maybe, it was riding my bike, and make full effort in that moment. And know that I just had to believe that would carry me forward. But as for what would happen at the race, I had no idea. And I wonder if we have time to read one. It's 6:45? Yeah. So now that'll bring me to Leadville, and I'll just read an excerpt from that chapter. Again, having been practicing so much on making true effort, being myself, trusting that, and letting go of any kind of attachment to results. So here I am. It's August of 2018. It was so beautiful. It had all been so beautiful. Driving into Leadville, I'm so overcome by emotion at the sight of the mountains, I have to pull over on the shoulder. To the west rises the broad summit of Mount Elbert at 14,440 feet, the highest peak in Colorado. The Leadville 100 course snakes along the mountain's broad forested base to Twin Lakes, then climbs steeply to Hope Pass and down the other side to Winfield. I've run it in my body. I had come up a few months earlier to just run a little bit on the course. And now, as I blink back tears of gratitude for being here and being healed, finally whole, I'm running it in my mind. Do not doubt that green mountains are always walking. The 13th century or the 12th century Zen master Dogen wrote, even something so stalwart as a mountain, seemingly so still, is dynamic and alive. Whatever happens, good, bad, ugly, finish, or drop out, will be icing on the cake, a celebration of how I've gotten here and what I've learned, the least of which is about running. Make sincere effort for the good. Be yourself. Let go. Keep going. A long race is like all of life lived in a single day. It rained and the sun came out. I ate energy gels and drank Coke and climbed Hope Pass going south and then back up again going north, this time with Steve pacing me. We passed dozens of runners charging downhill, and one cried out, "Great job," in an Australian accent. Steve behind me erupts into song. I come from the land down under, he sings. Over and over we belt out men at work songs until at last we ascend out of the trees and into the alpine and reach the top of Hope Pass at 12,600 feet. Steve hands me a styrofoam cup of miso soup at the aid station, and then it's nowhere to go but down. Am I tired? Oh, wait. Sorry. I have the odd sensation of being neither ahead nor behind myself, but right where I am, exactly in the center of effort. Not more than I can handle, not less. Just right. Running, as the mountain itself. So I won't tell you what happens next, but we might have a little idea. So this had been this journey of sort of applying the principles of Zen to my running. And all that time I thought that that Zen was helping me run, and now I know that running was really helping me understand Zen. And this is now 6 years, 6 years later, from Leadville. And just as a footnote, I did go back and do the mountain bike race 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, and I applied many of the same teachings that I had learned, which during my process of training, which is to make full effort each day and just hold loosely to any idea of what might happen. And it was really a joyful process. It was joyful because I was a beginner again. I used to ride my mountain bike all the time, and then I had babies, and it was too much of a bother. And then I got really into running. But to go back to mountain biking, it's just a reminder that you can be a beginner again in anything, and anything you do with great acumen and talent, you can come to it with that beginner's mindset of what can I learn today, what can I receive. And I just want to read this last little bit. It's not the last part, but we went back to the Middle Fork. It was the summer of the pandemic, and our annual trip to Canada was canceled. The border closed indefinitely. We drove north to Sun Valley like last time, 16 hours. Everything felt different. The girls were 10 and 12, old enough to come along. The summer I didn't die was so far away. I'd finally read the Jim Harrison book. That's a reference to a book I'd brought on the first trip. I'd finally read the Jim Harrison book, and it was nothing like my story after all. I'd released it. If you seek for freedom, you cannot find it, Suzuki writes in Zen Mind. Our way is not always to go in one direction. Sometimes we go east, sometimes we go west. Change is the only true constant. We were all so different now. We'd signed up for a guided trip. There were 20 other guests. Pippa and Maisie, those are our daughters, fought over who got to sit with the cool, young 20-something artist and her Hollywood actor boyfriend who took them under their wing. The most senior guide, Buzz, in his early 70s, taught them card tricks. The river was lapis and clear, the color of the sky, the rapids lower and slower in July than they'd been in June, a river lazing into midsummer. Fleabane, gooseberry, lupine burst forth along the shore. Steve fished for cutthroats till dark. My notebook that summer was fur green, smudged with dirt. It was our 14th wedding anniversary. Every afternoon when we got to camp, I went for a run along the river trail. I had been hoping to do that first trip. There's part of the river has a rough trail. It was rocky and faint in places, sometimes hugging the edge of choppy talus slopes that dropped steeply to the river. It was a long way to fall. I ran slowly, carefully, matching my pace to the trail. The running was not what I expected. The trail was rougher, overgrown, not so straightforward. You had to watch your footing. You could not run free. In Zen, you are supposed to get rid of everything extra from your practice and just do the thing itself completely. The river had its own flow. Maybe the running was extra. So I think I'll end there. I'm happy to take questions. Yeah, okay. Absolutely.
Just grab the mic here.
Ask me anything.
Well, just so the folks online can hear us. Oh, the people online. Katie has offered just a few minutes for questions here. So I think Kieran can enable folks online to unmute themselves. So if you have a question or comment for Katie, please feel free to do so. And here in the Zendo, we have a mic we can pass around.
You mentioned that to feel Zen, you have to be yourself, right?
Yeah.
And how do you know what it means for you to be yourself, and how do you know who you are?
How do I know who I am? That's a great question. I think I've always felt like my truest self. I'm muted.
Not through our system.
Okay, good. I just had a panic. I think I've always felt my truest self when I'm in the mountains, when I'm running, and that it's an expression of sort of who I am, most free, running, and I read about this a lot in my first book, Running Home. Running, I never came to it as like an exercise or a sport, but as a creative practice. It was how I would come to my page as a writer, and as I mentioned earlier, it was how I, moved the ideas through me by moving my body. And so I just felt like myself when I ran, and which isn't to say when I was off the mountain, I always knew who to be, right? Certain phases in my life, I felt more certain, and in other times it was like, how are we supposed to be? But I would usually find that answer up on the mountain, in just sort of the joy with which I ran, and also on the page when I write, I can sort of tune out the noise of how we're supposed to be like other people, and just be myself. But it's a practice. It's a daily practice every day of coming back and trying to find that person. Thank you. Anyone else?
So with two daughters, are they high school age?
Yes.
Are they runners as well?
My older daughter is a runner.
Do you find that they're following their mother's footsteps in terms of, a zenful running? Are they, competitive?
Yeah, it's interesting. My older daughter, they're both very athletic and active. Obviously, we've raised them outside in the mountains, but I never wanted to push anything on them, and that was sort of the gift of my own running, is that I took to it very early, but not in a competitive way. It was the 70s, your parents don't pay attention. No one was managing your athletic career in high school, and so I just ran as like a way to be free outside. So I wanted that for my girls. I wanted to be this intrinsic love if they found it. And my older daughter did, just by accident. She was a soccer player, but due to some eligibility rules, she couldn't play varsity soccer at her new high school, and so she tried cross country, and she took to it right away. And I basically had to pretend that I'd never even heard of the sport of running. Like, I had to be way in the background and let it totally be her thing. And sometimes before a meet, I'd be like, maybe just drink a little water, and she's like, Mom, I got it. But to answer your question, she has a very deep center line with running, and it's remarkable to see. So far, knock on wood, she's not getting pulled out or tossed away by performance or times. And honestly, I think that's why she runs successfului, is that she's able to tap into this sort of deep inner strength that is not coming from external results, but yields external results.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing, looking at a youth sport and where it's gone, and to have parents like you clearly are, teaching the right thing.
Yeah, it's hard.
Right.
That's
It's really
practice
difficult. I have
too.
2 daughters, same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
It's so easy to compare and pull.
Oh my goodness.
I
Right.
did ask her to come today. I said, would you like to come and bring some of your team? And
She's like, oh.
she
heck
said,
no.
actually, we're running in Galisteo, but I would love to otherwise. But yeah. Yes, I loved her tactical approach. Yeah.
That's cool.
Thank you.
Is there any questions online?
Do I just go to the chat?
To reactions, you'll see.
No questions yet.
I just wanted to say thanks. That was beautiful, beautiful presentation, and yeah, mixture of your question about how do you know your true self, and yeah, and no self, and running.
No, right. No self.
It's just a wonderful, mysterious sort of activity that we're engaged in here.
Right.
Anyway, thanks again.
Thank you. I will say just something on those lines. It's not in this book because it happened, several years after. But I was up in Colorado running a 50-mile race called the San Juan Solstice, which is out of Lake City in the San Juan Mountains, and it's really beautiful. And But there's a long section of that course that's way above tree line with a lot of exposure for about 12 miles and nowhere to go if a storm comes in. And I'm very cautious / nervous about lightning up high in the mountains. And my friend who had paced me at Leadville gave me some advice, and he said, don't leave, X aid station if there's storms coming or if the sky looks threatening. And so I was really worrying about it all day. I was sort of attaching to that, like, what if, and it was pulling me out of that race, and I was not having a great race because I was worrying. And I got to the aid station, it was clear, and I ran up on that ridge, and it was, I don't know, I just had a moment of thinking or sort of being absorbed by that koan, who were you before even your parents were born? Or what was your face? Yeah, what is your original face before even your parents were born? And I understood up there on the mountain that it was mountains. And it was a really beautiful, like, dropping away of self, but also seeing into the true self, inside. So yeah, it's hard to put into words like most of Zen. It's a koan, I guess. It is a koan.
You may have just answered this, Katie, beautifully, but let me ask it anyways. You mentioned during the talk about being stripped to the essence, and certainly ultra endurance events are one way to get stripped to the essence. I'm curious, just like assuming that you have those like darker, psychologically challenging moments out there, where do you go, or what do you lean on to help you sort of push through that?
In those moments.
Yeah.
You have them on the mountain in long races, but also, at the kitchen table or over the computer writing, or, on the phone with your book editor. So one thing I learned in the course of healing and preparing or practicing for Leadville and then in the writing of this book was the power of how we talk to ourselves. And so in those moments, in sort of the darkest, I learned this, or I just came to this on my own. I was running the 50-mile race in the Jemez Mountains, which is a really wonderful ultramarathon here outside of Los Alamos, and used to go out into the Valles Caldera, and I read about that in my first book, but the race that I'm talking about had been, the course had been moved because of fire. And I was running up this long, very exposed through the burn, sort of switchbacks, like a lunar landscape above Los Alamos town. And it was my first race back after I broke my leg. I had done the Grand Canyon, which was questionable. And then I was racing the Jemez. And I had a period of like very dark, almost panic. That came, I don't know, sort of from the depths of me. And I thought I might have a panic attack or be pulled from the course. And, all those fears and darkness comes rushing at me. And I just started talking out loud to myself. And that was not premeditated. It was just, I guess I'd needed to hear those words from my husband or my daughters. I had come alone that day to the race. Oftentimes I have my family supporting me, but they're busy too, and we're a young family going in lots of directions. And so I was supporting myself that day, and so I needed to be that person for myself. I was saying what I wanted them to say to me. I love you, I'm proud of you, you're okay. And what I learned in that race was that those are really the things. Maybe this goes back to the original self question too, that I needed to be saying to myself no matter what, offering myself that compassion and love. And that obviously I get from people in my life, but we can't always get exactly what we want in the moment. And the subtitle of the book, and subtitles are tricky. Publishers love them because it tells booksellers where to put them and how to sell a book. And this one is called Zen and the Art of Running Free. And I initially didn't want the word Zen in the title because it's sort of like if you label it Zen, is it Zen? But then I thought a lot about Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and a lot of the books that have been so meaningful to me have the word Zen in them. So, I let the publisher give it that subtitle and approved it. And but I do want to point out that it could just as easily be Zen in the art of staying married, or Zen in the art of writing. That it's all those things. It's Zen in the art of just being alive. And so, learning that was really helpful. And I still do it. And as I was saying it out loud, there were people around me. And, I think they were like looking at me, and maybe they thought I was talking to them. And one of them was like, do I look that bad? Because I was like, I'm proud of you, keep going. And, but I've since, I do it a lot. And not only do I talk to myself, but I love talking to other people when I run. And I think that's sort of why running, or any kind of endurance sport, it is such a community, right? You probably experienced that, Grant, at Leadville, that it is this realizing of oneness, that we're all out there suffering and experiencing elation at different points, but we're together. Okay.
Maybe one more question, but it's going to be the easiest one. Have you experienced awakening, and if you'd like to share it? The easiest one.
Many brief flashings, but I won't give it away, but there's, at the end of the book, I have I read about an awakening experience I have sort of unexpectedly, and not in a zendo on the side of a mountain, shrouded, misty forest in Japan, but, at a red light in town, listening to the radio.
It's possible to have many awakenings.
That's how I interpret it, right? That that the flashings and the awakenings are there, and we are the flashings, and to watch for them, but also to not hold them, right? Because if we hold on to them, like that original quote, like when we let them go, we're always prepared to see the flashings. So we don't want to stockpile them, or create like a life list. Like a bird count, if you're a birder. We're not making a list of the birds, but they're in our hearts.
Beautiful. That's a great place to finish.
We have.
Just one last question.
Can we get the mic just for the folks online?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, does your husband participate in your Zen life?
I'm glad you asked, and this too is in the book, so you might like to pick up a copy. I do have copies that I'll be selling and signing, but that's not really. I don't mean to plug it that way. But he does not. But he is very much his own. He has a Zen quality to him that I recognized from the first when I met him, of being his true self. And he's a gardener. So that can give you some indication of just being present for what is, and you can't rush the beauty in plants. So yeah.
I mean, so do many fly fishermen.
Yes, right. I would say fly fishing is his Zen practice, and but he also, like my father, I know coincidence there maybe, would not identify as a Zen practitioner, but he certainly is my Zen teacher. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.